Morning, folks. We'll just be a few minutes before we get started, waiting for others to join. But thanks for joining. Good morning, everybody. We'll get started in like a minute or two. The meeting notes are in the invite. If you wouldn't mind adding yourself to the attendance, unless you object, in which case you don't have to. And if there's any topics that you'd like to talk about, feel free to add them in. Like usual, this will be hopefully mostly just kind of Q&A and discussion. Couple updates to give, but this is public forum, so. All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the December 7th, the last public meeting we'll have of 2022. The next one should be right after New Year's, so couple updates. We have first, welcome Yesenia, who's on the call, who joined us a couple weeks ago as our first hire to the Alpha Omega team. Yesenia will be focusing on engineering, but because we're a small team, it'll be on kind of everything. So we're really looking forward to making a lot of progress, particularly on the Omega side in 2023. So welcome Yesenia. I don't know if you want to say anything, putting you on the spot, but you're welcome to if you'd like.
Yeah, just excited to be here. And if anybody has any feedback or suggestions, just feel free to reach out to me after or the upcoming meetings.
Awesome. So second update is we have an annual report that we've been working on for a while. We're expecting it to get published next week. No promises, but that's kind of the target at this point. So keep your eyes open for that. We are continuing to explore additional alpha engagements in early 2023. So expect those to continue. There right now we have 5 active engagements. So Node, Rust, Eclipse, jQuery, and then Python's just getting started. So I'm expecting in early 2023 to start seeing start getting updates on some of those projects. And then we recently had some Omega tooling updates. I can talk a little bit more about those. Everything there is in the Omega folder within the Alpha Omega repo. So we're trying to consolidate and keep everything there. At some point, I'm sure the mono repo idea will seem like a worse idea than it does right now. But for now, it keeps things organized. What we have there is first of all, the analyzer, which has been there for a while. We have the assurance assertions, let's say proof of concept code or MVP or whatever you want to call it. That was merged in, and then we have a PR with a triage portal code that we wrote was it last year? No, must have been earlier in 2022. And that's like, I don't know, maybe 70% complete. So that'll make its way in and get merged soon. But I think that'll be a good repo to put all of, we develop scripts for fuzzing, we'll add them in there. We'll just kind of, continually like use the things that we develop for our own use that are, somewhat usable outside. We'll just kind of keep pushing that into the repo. So hopefully it'll be more valuable over time. Happy to talk more about assertions, but if there's other topics that y'all would, I realize I talked about this a bit last month, and so I don't want anybody to have to hear the same story like N times. So if there are things that you'd like to talk about more, we can do that. Joshua, I see Yocto and AO. We can chat about that. If anyone else has other things, we can do that. And we can just kind of use assurance assertions to fill up the available space, because we could talk about that for a long time. So, Joshua, Yocto?
Sure, yeah, I'd appreciate that because I can't stay for the full duration of the call. So I'm effectively an emeritus contributor to the Yocto project. I'm working in OpenSSF space nowadays, but I've been trying to work with some of the folks who are still very active in Yocto project, including the project's architect, to understand how Yocto project might, to use the motto on screen, turn some money into security, and also how Yocto project might be beneficial to Omega. So we have started drafting a document where we effectively pitch for an alpha engagement in terms of improving the security of Yocto project, establishing more processes around CV updates. So sorry, I should probably step back. Yocto project may not be familiar to everyone. So Yocto project is an embedded Linux distribution tool. So there's a bunch of places that are running custom lightweight embedded Linux distributions, and Yocto project is like a tool for building and maintaining those distributions. So instead of once upon a time, people would do things like take Ubuntu and rip out a bunch of bits and stick it on a Wi-Fi router or a carrier grade Linux device or something, and then not be able to update it in a reasonable way or recreate the environment for a new product. So Yocto project is focused on solving that problem. It's got this really neat cross-compiling, rebuildable, reproducible toolchain. So you can create your customized Linux distribution, and then you can say recompile it for a different hardware architecture with just a configuration change, or pull in a bunch of updates and generate a newer image or an update package for an existing image, or all of those kind of cool things. And it's an LF project with a relatively small team of core contributors, and they the way they are able to handle security and responding to CVs and things like that today are on a kind of ad hoc basis that pulls resources away from the core contributors. So they'd love to effectively have an alpha engagement and bring someone in to help do some automation and define new processes and pull together a team from the existing contributors and the contribution companies and establish some security processes.
Sure.
And then the other thing that the project architect is keen on is that the this is a build system effectively, and one of the things that we did with the project in the past but isn't done so much nowadays is we could like take like we could track GCC's Git tree and pull that in and do builds and see how those changes might affect the recipes, the different packages that the Yocto project built. And so there's a case to be made for using Yocto project as part of the Omega toolchain to be able to do like these leading edge builds and do integration testing and like functional testing at scale of things as they're developing, rather than waiting for release to be able to like do that kind of testing. So with, I mean, I'm going to stop and give some space for questions in a minute, but effectively the reason I'm here is to try and figure out like if either of those things are something that Alpha Omega is interested in, and what the best way to move forward is with like trying to
So yes, this sounds very much. I'm going to kind of brainstorm and kind of talk as I'm thinking, which is never a good idea. A lot of it seems like square in the middle of what Alpha is about. So if assuming that there is a like in any case, the first thing we got to look for is like, what is the risk today, and would applying money to security like noticeably change that risk? So, it sounds like Yocto does impact some fairly critical systems that don't have a lot of great other options. So understanding, like how we can help and how we can know that we helped is great there. I mean, it's also an experiment. So like, this is interesting because we haven't done another one of these. So that sounds great. I am a little tiny bit cautious about AO spending money with LF projects. So and this isn't Yocto's fault. So I think it's and I think it's something we can just manage. But we funded Node, which is OpenJS, which is LF. We funded jQuery, which is OpenJS, which is LF. And I don't want, I haven't heard the objection, but if I was on the outside and I look at this, I would say, hey, are we just like funneling money within ourselves? But at the same time, though, like I'm sure there's like a really good convincing answer to like put that argument to rest. So I don't want that to at all, influence how we go. I think the way to get started, shoot Michael Windsor and I an email or ping us on Slack or whatever. We'll just set up some time, chat. It doesn't have to be super formal. It's really just a discussion and kind of spitballing ideas back and forth. And then we land on something that's like, yes, for the next 6 or 12 months, these are the outcomes that you'd like, that we think are reasonable and attainable and all that. And then this is approximately what it would cost, and just kind of do it. I do think that there's a comment from Sal. Anything kind of SBOM related is good, just because SBOM has a lot of eyes and ears on it at the moment. I think Salsa actually, and I'm not sure. I don't know enough about Yocto to know where Salsa plays in and if it does, but if it does, that would be an interesting way to say that, the Yocto builds are also, provide this assurance level over and above what the core, GCC or whatever like components might, and that might get you into a place where you're building this like weird Frankenstein thing that isn't really compatible because you've like done things to it. But at least exploring that option, I think, is the is a great place for alpha to play. For Omega, on the kind of understanding how complex systems interact and staying at bleeding edge. I think that's interesting. Let's talk more about it. That might be it might not be a good fit right now for Omega, just because we have this giant list of like the actual released versions of things, and as we develop tooling, what we should keep in mind is how do we can we pay now to prevent future problems rather than just constantly being in a whack-a-mole situation. And I think for that, anything where you're kind of exploring the tree and seeing how this change impacts not only that project but its dependencies and things might be really interesting. Because right now there's practically no way to do that at any kind of scale. So
yeah,
sounds awesome.
That makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah, I kind of suggested to the folks on the project that like maybe splitting the two, like the alpha pitch and the omega pitch, into separate things would probably be a way forward.
It's all the same people, so let's just have the discussion. Keep it easy on everybody's side. There's no reason to make things more complicated than they need to be. But yeah, no, that sounds terrific.
Sounds awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. There's another topic. Maintainer training, ecosystem hardening. Who would like to talk about that?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. I think I've met some of you before. I had an opinion on the Yocto thing because I'm a cloud computing engineer, but I work with a lot of hardware, OpenStack, and like Buildroot, like that entire side, right? Buildroot, Yocto, at that side, the hardware level is just like totally ignored at the security level, and we really need way more help there. And also on the AI side, but that's going to take time. So what I wanted to talk about was, one, to kind of say thank you, because we ran the last like 2 months a security slam within CNCF, and we got some funding from Google, which was a little Alpha Omega inspired. And we were able to give diversity scholarships out through CNCF for every CNCF project that got to 100% security compliance, which was important to me because that is one of the strongest predictors of whether or not an open source project is going to have a vulnerability in the next quarter. So I care a lot about figuring out how we're going to really fix this problem at the language level, after we also help hardware kind of first, please. It's a concern for me. But what I'd like to propose is, now that we have some of these relationships in place, right? We've got Node, if we can cover like a Buildroot area, if we can cover, I know that we've got a Ruby relationship in place. I just want to ensure that coming out of that, we take the lessons learned from security and turn them into communicable training, specifically tailored to maintainers. And secondarily to that, we are submitting our final sort of request from the US federal government for a cybersecurity training mobilization plan, for which over the next 2 years, we will be implementing security best practices training for each of the languages. So I wanted to really put that seed out there, that as we're at the perfect time right now to be able to make sure that that's in place, that that's just a necessary part of engaging with Alpha Omega, is also training maintainers broadly in that space.
I think that's super interesting. So I would love, so you mentioned that there's a getting to 100% on a security thing is a strong predictor of the lack of future vulnerabilities. Is that anecdotal, or is there data? Because I would love to be able to refer back and say like,
oh, there is data. So I'll give you a quick link, but this comes from, so Sonatype does supply chain research. I just moved from them to a new director of open source. But in our 2022 statistics show us the most predictive elements, and this is one of them.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so now we have the ability, we worked with CNCF to sort of like test this theory in practice by, once we have that data of what was predictive, we just take a cohort and get them over the finish line in 2 months. So we're demonstrating that now, and it seems to be true. So I'll put a link in this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. So some of what you said, I mean, it's super interesting, and yes, I want to talk more about it. Some of it feels more OpenSSF than Alpha Omega. So I want to be careful. One of the hard things about sitting in this chair is kind of wanting to do something, but realizing that if we expand AO too far beyond its confines, that will wind up getting nothing done. So, but either way, I would be happy to advocate and help broker and whatever that kind of conversation. We are looking at, I know there's a ton of work in OpenSSF around education and training, and that's a kind of a core, going to be a core part of the 2023 kind of strategy, let's say. We're also kicking off some work, and Sandy, if you want to give a quick synopsis of the university thing. I don't know that it quite fits, but it's kind of interesting. I don't, again, put you on the spot, but
yeah, I'll definitely take the spotlight real quick from you. So one of our programs we're trying to start driving and kind of designing is a university outreach where we'll have a list of vulnerabilities that essentially we find, and kind of work with teams in the universities to help kind of triage vulnerability from start to finish with reporting, mitigation steps, as well as training and helping the university students kind of get on board and understand that space, as well as being able to knock off some of those vulnerabilities on our list. So that's kind of one of the programs we're trying to drive for 2023 that kind of fits into some of the things that you had mentioned.
Cool. Yeah, we'll set up a separate call and have a discussion here, because I think it's like what it is entirely is a tandem approach. And so we're going to have specific hires covering each language. And I just want to make sure that we get security best practices transferred over from Alpha Omega, anything that we learn, especially right when we're like putting a security immune system around Rust right now. That's never been done. There's genuinely new findings that need to be distributed. Yeah, I'm excited about that. So we'll have another chat, but that's it. I just wanted to make sure that was on the. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Monowar, you want to chat about PyPy Scan?
Yeah, so just for people who have not heard of this idea, so a couple of months ago, we did a POC. Basically, the goal was to use the tool that we have, Intelligent Code Repair, or ICR, scan it on the top 200 PyPy, top 200 projects in the PyPy repository, and figure out like what can we find, and can we report them back to the maintainers, see how they react and everything. So we found bugs. These are all listed in the pypy.openrefactory.com page, and we randomly sampled, randomly picked about 25 bugs that was found by these tools, reported back to the maintainers. For 13 or 14 of them were have been patched so far. I think 12 were patched like right away within a week or so. But I mean, so essentially what we are at this point, we are expanding upon the project, as in like beyond, like going beyond the top 200 projects, doing that more. So our approach is more head-on than what like the Alpha Omega is building the tools. Also, there's the effort on assertions tooling. We are taking over a vertical, like PyPy in this particular case. Specific tools, we can actually include the other tools that are in the Omega toolchain as well. And we would like to see what can we find, then report back, and then manage that thing. I was not aware of this like university initiative. This is a great idea. The critical resource here is how can we scale this for hundreds of projects and so on. So that's where, but at this point, in order for us to expand upon this, we are kind of so we need two supports specifically. One is that there's some infrastructure support, because running this thing on at scale also requires cloud resources and so on. So that's that. But more importantly, it's the the endorsement that OpenSSF is affiliated with that, because when we are reporting the bugs, if it is coming from a third-party vendor versus if it is coming from OpenSSF's Alpha Omega tools, like these are the stuff that was found by Alpha Omega tools or ICR or both, and so on. So that particular formality is also desired, because then it gets more acceptance, and we can keep track of this long term. Like we can think of, again, a 6 to 12 month horizon. We can track this, like let's say, like we take a quarter and see like how many bugs have we identified, how many bugs have we reported, what is the acceptance result, and so on, and then look at it like per quarter basis, as in like whether to expand upon this or not. So that's kind of the idea. I'd love to talk with you. I mean, it's with you, Michael, Windsor, or somebody else whom you think is a good fit to see like how we can expand upon this particular effort.
That's interesting. So you know, we've talked in the past about this. I've had other discussions with let's just say commercial vendors that have interesting data about whether Omega in particular could be kind of that last mile. So, you know, going from a vulnerability that someone is fairly sure is real and impactful and important enough to report, but the process of the back and forth with the maintainer and questions and follow-up and tracking and all that stuff is non-trivial and not solved by any means. So, you know, I know Jonathan's on the call here, and you know, Jonathan has a lot of experience in doing this stuff. You know, it seems like there were a lot of attempts at different approaches here. I know, you know, GitHub now has private issues. That feels like a game changer to me in terms of the process, because a lot of what we've had to do has been this like work around the fact that, you know, it's hard to contact the maintainer privately unless they've like set up a thing for it, and there's no way to discover that at scale. I don't know, Jonathan, if you had any thoughts on that,
but my response on this is thank you so much, Kate and the GitHub team, for adding this feature. It doesn't have an API, so I can't use it when I'm reporting vulnerabilities at scale. So, you know, it's better than nothing. It's also opt-in. So we'll see how widely it gets adopted. I think that I respect GitHub's decision about not making it opt-in to begin with. I also think that it needs to be not that way eventually. So we'll see. I think I don't mind opting out. I just think that it should not be something you have to opt into.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jonathan and I, we were participants, or not participants, like as in like we were speaking, but we were observing the panel that they had at GitHub, and several people raised that issue. But I mean, GitHub at this point is not going beyond opt-in. But initially I also thought that this is a great initiative and so on. It is, but what it essentially does is it basically does coordinated disclosure, but within GitHub. Like coordinated disclosure has several problems, as in the non-response, etc. Making it within GitHub, there are promises, but it doesn't necessarily like solve the problems, like all the problems, as in like if so most of the time, like when some third party like there's a reporting, there's no activity that's been going on, so there's no initiative or anything that this would expedite the thing, although because that's so. Just to give a case in point, a recent Apache commons text vulnerability, which was reported in October, this was identified by the GitHub security team in March of this year. So between March and October, that's how long it took for the Apache commons text in order to like complete the coordinated disclosure process. So that tends to be a very long process most of the time. Like initially when I heard of it, I thought like, okay, yeah, is that that going to be fixed, but apparently there's, I mean, the component, the way it is described, it doesn't fix that particular problem. So that was another thing that was a little bit of a letdown.
I mean, I think there were also interesting like long poles in the tent, which are like Apache is all volunteers. Like you will at any project that is volunteer driven, volunteer maintained, like there should be. I think you could make an argument that there should be no expectations about them ever fixing it because there is no contract there. There's no you haven't given them anything in exchange for their time and attention. At the same time, you're under no obligation to use their thing. And I don't know that like it's hard because the security part of me wants to say like, fix it. When are you going to fix it? And then the other side of me is like, who are you demanding this of? Like, I have side projects that I do, and someone reporting to me a thing is usually pretty low on my list of things to fix. So.
Yeah, okay. So I think there's two separate issues here. One I think is way important. I think we really need to have a discussion with GitHub about making this not an opt-in, or at least making it very clear that we embed this in best practices so that maintainers know to do it. Secondarily, obviously they're creating a bottleneck around 0 days, and that's really stupid. That's not the point. So conversation needs to be had there, or we're putting a massive ecosystem surface area at risk for weeks to months at a time when it doesn't need to be that way. Second, I think so there's 1/3 of the entire plan for the mobilization effort is rewards and incentives for this volunteer class of maintainers. And this is where I'm coming back to the discussion of cybersecurity fatigue in open source is like one of the #1 reasons why we lose maintainers, but we can't lose maintainers because they hold the IP. We need to develop a new class of cybersecurity aware contributors / sort of, I see realistically sort of cross-project maintainer class that are security aware. Otherwise, we're going to keep running into this problem. But both of those are different conversations. And it does sound to me, just as a concerned citizen on the internet, I would like to have that information process in place.
I would too. Like we very quickly run up against, I think, like unsolved people problems. Like, how do you incent, cybersecurity researchers to go and like sprinkle the security goodness over projects? Like, are they getting paid to do this? Is it their job, or are they doing this out of altruism or interest or whatever? In which case, like, I think you'll always like we've had that like altruistic, forever. But the scale of the problem has far outpaced the number of people and energy and whatnot. I think bug bounties, while I have
they don't pay your salary unless you're like doing it as like you have to be going for bigger programs, or
right.
Like even the GitHub Security Lab bug bounty program. I was looking at the math on like how you could attain $100,000 a year salary, and you need to come up with 10 big queries in a year, and they have to all be criticals, and and then you have to use those to all or you like, and the problem with that is like the math there just doesn't work out, because like it takes more time to write the queries. Disclosure takes a long time, 90 days per repository, standard. So
but the same
more money in the system though. Yeah.
But like so if you take was it secure open source rewards, sos.dev, which is under the AO kind of umbrella now. So this is a fund that we have to pay either maintainers or non-maintainers to do security improvements to anything that's like important to open source. And there was a cutoff described, but let's suppose there's enough projects above that there's like an infinite pool. the uptake on that is pretty low.
Not
Has anybody claimed that? Yeah. Well,
Not
Some
No,
people have learned of it.
the problem is that you reach out to SOS dev, you submit and you just don't get any response. So like, for instance, I've been working with
Oh,
Argos.
I
We
didn't know
got
that.
them graduated last week, but like the standardization around security for open source, like I'm just going to focus on CNCF, but I've worked with Python and with Java, right? But like for this, they denied them because of their threat modeling. So I looked up all of the graduated projects who had worse threat models. I submitted a Threagile, which is a like top class
Yeah.
threat model, and we finally got it through. There's no standardization of best practices here. But we had submitted, right? So we went and had everyone become 100% security compliant, complete to submitting SBOMs, which they have to do somewhat manually for a lot of these projects. And we have not had a single cent come out of SOS Dev. I've had those conversations, the money's not moving, that it was supposed to be a solve, and it's been around for over a year, and maintainers aren't getting.
Can you email Michael Windsor and I on a separate thread, and we will unstuck whatever is stuck? Is it like no response, or is it like back and forth but not making progress?
Yeah, so I have to be clear that this is anecdotal from working with several projects, just in direct contact, but it sounds like it's like sometimes a response and a trickle, but I have not seen a single circumstance yet of money being transferred for labor done.
So if you want to hook us up with whoever is like actually on the other end, and I'll ping on our end, there's no reason why that should be getting stuck. I know it is kind of like we're trying to figure out like how to make it more operationally like scaled in 2023. And if that means we need to put money into it, that's great. We should, I mean, it has money, so we can use that, but either way, that should be an available option for anybody, but I get all the other points too. Cool.
In my experience, the other one that exists is the Internet Bug Bounty Program. I haven't submitted anything to them for a while, but in my experience, they are unwilling to issue bounties if you have received bounties from other spaces. So like if you did some research, like I did a bunch of research and found the use, like, eliminated the use of HTTP across the Java ecosystem. I got like $5,000 in bounties from various different organizations for reporting to that. And then the Internet Bug Bounty Program wouldn't issue me an additional reward because they said, well, you got paid from some of these other programs, even though I did a lot of work that was not focused on just the organizations that I reported the vulnerabilities to.
Okay.
So that was interesting. I don't know. Is there any relationship with the IBB with this group or the OSSF?
Not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean that there isn't. It just means that I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. We have about 20 minutes left. I can fill up the rest of the time with where we are with assertions, but feel free to stop me and we can take this off in a different direction.
Assertions?
Yes.
What are
Michael,
assertions?
I still haven't gotten any guidance from like how do I coordinate with you, or yeah, basically like how to take the PyPy project forward.
If it can, so realistically, if it can wait until January, I think we'd be in a better position to have that conversation. I do want to kind of move things forward and have a kind of a structured way of doing this. I'm not. Let's have a conversation in January.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So assurance assertion. So this is my pitch deck. So this is the one where you guys, everybody throw vegetables. If you think it's terrible, I want to hear it.
Wrong conference. You're thinking of ShmooCon. They throw stuffed animals or squishies.
I'm happy with anything. So the motivating example is, right now most organizations, if they're lucky, they're checking for CVEs. But executives, I think, like that is an implementation detail that, like, the security department or the open source, the open source programs office might be interested. The executive is like, no, are we safe? And they're like you've checked all the code, right? And they're like, of course we haven't checked the code. Like that's insane. But we do more than just CVE checks. So instead, we have a set of policies. The policies check every piece of open source that we use to make sure that it meets our organizational policies. It's maintained. It doesn't have CVEs, because that is still important, but it doesn't do like weird things like roll its own crypto. Here's a dashboard of it. We monitor this stuff continually and can see where our risk is. Now, we may not be funded or motivated or whatever to address that risk, but at least we understand it. And I think that it's really hard to get resources to fix a problem if you can't articulate it. This is the motivation behind this. There's also a much more practical and tactical reason, which is that as Omega does, goes through and runs tools across lots of things, we're going to find a lot of stuff. We need to keep track of that in a way, and we also want that to be public. And in which case, like, I don't want to just put it on a spreadsheet. So we need something better than that. It kind of evolved into this. The mission of Assurance Assertions, as it says here, is to provide stakeholders consumable data they can use that describes the security quality of the open source they use. There is nothing about this that is actually open source. I mean, the reference implementation is open source, but the target is just software. It's just it's not even software. It's just a thing. It's the schema, I guess, is the only thing that is concrete. Because we want stakeholders, meaning organizations, users, compliance departments, whoever, to be able to make these decisions, with the right information in an efficient way, based objectively. So I don't want folks just relying on CVEs, or even worse, CVEs with SBOMs, because I think that provides more information that doesn't, well, make it about SBOMs. I think we can go a step or two up above what those can do. Some context, but I think we all know this. Like, most open source has never gone through any kind of validation. When it does, some organizations do this, but they usually don't share the results. We tried sharing the results through the Security Reviews OpenSSF project. That it is really hard to scale. We did some automated security reviews through there, and that was another kind of a thread that made its way into this. So if we can run tools, and we can generate a thing that you can, that says that this project is safe or not, there's some value in that. So we don't want security validation to be happening in multiple places by multiple orgs. In order to make a good risk decision, you need accurate consumable data. So we want to provide accurate consumable data. So let's just look at the actual thing. So the goal is take a bunch of open source projects, take some really good tools, run the tools against the projects, and there's some output. You take the output and you essentially distill that into an assertion that states the essence of what was learned there. So as an example, this package was reproducible. This package, when looked up on osv.dev or deps.dev or whatever, doesn't have any public vulnerabilities. This project, when scanned by CodeQL, has no critical findings. This project implements this crypto function. This library is written in Python. Anything that is kind of objectively that can be objectively pulled out can go into an assertion. And the assertion is, signed and all that stuff around it. But the core of it is a fact that should be pretty non-controversial. So we have this process to create these things. We have a continuous process. At this point, we just throw CPU at it and we run it across like every package or the top 10,000 or the top million, and create a whole bunch of these assertions. We store them in a repository someplace. Then you have the consuming end of it, where you have a policy, and your policy can say something like, I don't want any JavaScript functions implementing crypto. I want every package to be reproducible. I don't want any even though they're untriaged, I don't want any critical findings from CodeQL. The assertions are where you give your opinion. Sorry, the policies are where you give your opinion, and you can be as like reasonable or unreasonable as you want. It's just you're saying these are the laws that I want in my universe. So each organization creates their own can create their own policies. We'll provide a sample set. We can even have an opinion over what a reasonable set of policies are, but there's no reason why you can't bring your own. So these assertions are stored in a public repository. You consume them using either the public policies or your policies. You can even create the assertions yourself and store them in your own repository behind your firewall. You don't need to share them with anyone else, because at the end of the day, the consumption process is just a, give me all the assertions for package foo. And then you do this and you get a result. So, here's an example of what an assertion would look like. This is an assertion that expresses the results of a scorecard, OpenSSF scorecard scan. So, all the stuff on the left is the scorecard stuff. All the stuff on the right is the, let's say, the wrapper around it. And this goes into a, into a repo of some sort. So we have a, well, I'll get to that in a sec. So that's an example of an assertion. Sample policies, as I said, NPM module should not be implementing crypto. You can even get really detailed if you want. So no untriaged findings for command injection specifically, because if you feel that that's a particularly interesting type. The policies are can be arbitrarily complex. So you can, bring your own logic and do your own thing. So the let's see, architecture, that's kind of what it looks like. You have package, gets analyzed, assertions. There's some evidence that gets joined to that. It gets put someplace, and then you have a policy that runs against it, and you get a pass-fail at the end. So we have a reference implementation. This is in, actually the source code is now just available in main now. So we, we generate, I don't know, 8 or 9 different types of assertions, and we're going to generate more. We can store the assertions, in like the local file system and Azure Blob Storage and a web API and SQLite, and they're kind of easy to store wherever you want. Policies are either Open Policy Agent or just an arbitrary command. So you can, that's where you can kind of run whatever logic you want. And then we're going to generate assertions for a whole bunch of projects and, kind of put this out there and iterate and stuff like that. Really important here. Trust is provided by the consumer. So because this is going to be a public repository of assertions, you could say, well, who gets to put assertions in the repository? And at some point, like practically speaking, like we wouldn't make it like right available for the world. But there's no reason why we couldn't do that from a if we wanted to, because what you would say, and this is why the whole signing and wrapper stuff is important. you, the consumer, could say, I only trust assertions generated by OpenSSF. So we'll have some sort of a signing key or a, and we need to, I'm gonna hand wave around like how that would work. But you would explicitly say like, I trust, X, Y, and Z for my assertions, and therefore everything else doesn't, you don't use to make this policy decisions. You could say, I only trust myself, assertions that I've generated, in which case you can, store assertions wherever you want, query them, run stuff. There's no, like, everything can be run in a disconnected, air-gapped environment if you want. API surface is supposed to be very simple. I think this is, yeah, this is still correct. You generate assertion of a certain type. So the security advisory is the one that checks for CVEs. You store them in a place. You target npm express, and that's it. And then when you you can do lots of them. Execute, generate multiple assertions. And then to consume it, it's similar surface. You consume assertions for this package, for this policy or set of policies, and this is where you go to look for assertions, and that's it. And then you get a JSON like this policy failed, this policy passed, that kind of thing. So this is super, like, it's 15 minutes into a 45-minute bake, so it's still kind of wobbly. So we'd love to get feedback. We are talking to Guac. I'm going to try to get with them next month to kind of see how to align and whatnot. Also reached out to the InToto folks because there's some tie in there. But love to take questions, feedback, anything like that.
I mean, this would be awesome. I would still have, because ultimately, right, what I want and sort of with the CISO hat is at some point to have something I can verify enough to have like an SLA for open source, and we're still so far away from that. And I think that this approaches it. I have some practical concerns that we want to consider just in the development of this. On one side, probably not going to be an issue, but like it's a matter not just of how many things you ingest, but like what are the epochs, like how much time goes between fully asserting over a language base, for example, of like the top 1,000 projects. Are you going to do that once a day, once every 12 hours, once a month? And then secondly to that, within an ecosystem, if I'm thinking as a malicious actor, you can't run those all at one time because then I'm going to know that over a 12, 24, or 1 month period, I know exactly what point in time projects are going to think they are most secure when I've had the maximum amount of time to inject. That's just a consideration, and you can sort of cron your jobs at somewhat stick rates just to fix that. Just one practical consideration.
I think it's a great point. I've approached it thinking about packages rather than repositories. So packages are generally speaking immutable. So the fact that Express 1.2.3 is reproducible today, it'd be pretty hard for someone to abuse that to make it not reproducible tomorrow. Once we go to repositories and like a commit based thing, that'll be harder. But by and large, most people don't consume commits. They consume a tag or a release or a package or something like that. In which case, if you ask, if version 1.2.4 comes out tomorrow and we haven't scanned it yet, and you ask for assurance date on 1.2.4, you should get like, I don't have any information on that. We know nothing about 1.2.4. Maybe we have 1.2.3 and it says this, but like, I don't know if 1.2.4 is, even the same code base. So I think maybe being transparent about what we've scanned and provide some of that, but it's a good point. We need to be careful in the
How is
areas.
this distinct from scorecard? Because it seems like scorecard and best practice. Well, best practice is a little different, but like this seems like it's like in that same sort of vein, in that same sort of like ecosystem, same sort of like reporting world, but just like aggregated data, right? So
It's similar.
why is this not living with that? Why is this idea not living more closely with that project or that idea?
First, because we're experimenting, and it's easy to kind of experiment in isolation and like iterate a bunch of times and then see where it goes. Scorecard isn't so much policy based; it's more of it's like you could look at the assertions as spiritually in the same category as the scorecard, but the consumption of it, I think scorecard's going to say, well, here are the numbers.
Well, I think it's important to understand that like scorecard, literally none of the things that are on the open source market for security right now are statistically predictive of whether or not an OS project has a vulnerability. So like,
which is why I really want to read the link that you sent. I do want to.
Yeah. I think if we take a more numbers approach to it, like the most predictive thing is how like the mean time to update from the packages that they ingest. Like you really do have to think about it. Like that's kind of the core problem of, yeah, I'm not asking people to set on the bleeding edge, but also even like the top 4 back maintained releases, one of those is likely to go stale within the next 3-year period, right? And
Yep.
That's what I need to get out as soon as possible.
I would also like to be able to measure, and this is, kind of going a little bit further out on the skis, compliance with respect to things like SSDF. So I'm sure that it will not be possible to do all of it, but I'm sure that we can do a subset of it. And if the subset is large enough and interesting enough to be able to say that this package, project, repo, target, whatever, meets this thing, this sub-compliance set, I think might provide a lot of value, because I also, the practical side of me says, organizations are not going to be writing their own policies. They want something out of the box that meets their needs, and SSDF is kind of a, or similar to SSDF, but like something like SSDF, we can just target that and say, yeah, you are, SSDF light, which is all the measurable things that you can do, and here's the scores, and then orgs can do what they want with that. So I don't know. I think the most important thing that I want to be able to do here with this is iterate and try and get feedback and get some usage, and then just kind of spin it fast, and worry less about the things that tend to get these things bogged down, like the formal schema and expanding out use cases far beyond like open source. I'd rather delay those types of things until we have something that really works core with open source, and just kind of go from there. But if anybody's interested, this is in the Alpha Omega repo. You're welcome to try it out. The README should be correct. If it's not, and you try to run it and you can't, please open a bug and we'll fix it.
Yeah, I have a small feedback, which is for the first iteration. I mean, when you're talking about or giving examples of assertions, there are very many things that you can assert to. But since this is Alpha Omega, it's about tools, results, that maybe like we should really narrow the scope of that I mean, obviously, like the language that we are using or the underlying schema that we're using, like the in toto, it gives you a lot of flexibility and doing stuff. But for our project or this particular project, perhaps it's better to limit the scope to tools result. How will that be consumed and so on, and that might make things go faster.
Yeah, I think from like, this list is just sample, but like from this list, I think the only thing that's not tool derived is this, code review. Everything else there is so yeah. The goal is, you hit a button and then you come back next week and you have a whole pile of assertions for a whole pile of projects. Whether or not we're we could argue about like what the right set of initial assertions is, but having more assertions only costs CPU. You can just not have it referenced in a policy, in which case it's it doesn't mean anything to you. Cool. We are out of time. Thank you all very much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to continue the discussion. Please reach out on the Alpha Omega Slack channel or Slack or email or whatever if you have any questions, and enjoy your holidays. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello.